Hi, so this video is a response to Kyle, who I've been chatting with for a little while on kind of esoteric stuff. And he asked me if I knew anything about astronomy. And I kind of do, but I kind of don't. I don't have any, I don't think my perspective on astronomy is the same as most people's because I'll have to explain it to you. The way I sort of came to understand it isn't any sort of conventional way. And at the same time, this video should serve as a kind of redo of another video that I made where I ummed and ahed a lot, and I don't like sharing that video much. But the topic really kind of overlaps, so I thought this would be a good opportunity to make another video. So this is on the relationship between there's a hypothesis relationship between photography, astronomy or astrology, and the pineal gland. So the way I kind of came into this was when I started doing photography several years ago. And when I originally was using digital cameras, and you can take a lot of photos, you have that kind of liberty. And then after a year or so, I moved on to analog film cameras, and you only have 24 or 36 exposures usually. So you want to make your the way I entered it, that mindset was that you got to make every shot count. So I had set myself sort of like a rule or principle that I would only take one photo or try to take one photo of whatever it is that I wanted to take a photo of. And a lot of the time I was going outside and taking photos of nature or people in a particular environment arranged in a certain way. So there's a concept of uh, mind blank. Wow. Composition. So the concept of composition and design, especially, is the arrangement of various elements in a particular way that the viewer would find appealing. And this composition in visual design, really, the fundamentals of it really tend to rely on the Fibonacci sequence and the golden mean ratio. So things being dissected in a particular way and expanding or contracting in a particular way. There's a certain structure to that kind of stuff that when and this has been written about for thousands of years. There's a certain structure to visual design where if you construct a composition in a particular way, then the human eye or the brain or the consciousness responds to it and as if it's drawn into it, as if it's very, the brain finds it very appealing for some reason, and they don't know why. And so when I started taking photos on analog cameras with that mindset that I got to take one photo, make it count, then I had to start trying to rely on my intuition and just feel whether things were right or not. And a lot of the time I would be out in a natural environment, and there would be various elements that would come together and just sort of feel right. And if I stepped one step to the left, one step to the right, it would lose that feeling. And there would be moments where I would be walking past and see something, and it would just get in my head, and then I've walked too far, and I've had to backtrack and walk back, and just find that spot where things were just right. And that feeling is something that I had to trust, because with digital cameras, like I was saying, you can just keep taking and taking, and that freedom that it gives you in taking and taking, you kind of get lost in the process of noticing what you're actually looking at. But if you set your mind to to sort of focus more, and rely on that feeling, then there was something that was happening. There was something that was occurring, and the elements that can come together in the background, the foreground, and be visualized or be perceived by the camera or the viewer. And it's called parallax, right? So you see things in the background move more than things in the foreground, yeah? And you got to line it up just right, otherwise it doesn't quite, things don't quite marry up. So there's this kind of not projection, but a reception of these various elements in the outside world that in a particular arrangement or orientation, they would just spark something in my head. And even if I did take a couple of photos after I learned to trust that intuition, even if I did take a couple of photos after, that first one would always have it. It would just have something, some sort of feeling about it. Even if it was just, even if the second or third ones were slightly off, whatever, the first one would just have it. And I learned to trust that. And we're talking about things like, you could have a tree that's with its branches that are sort of overhanging a building or something, the roof of a building, or someone walking by in their stride while the sun casts a shadow in a particular way. And these elements in visual design, in photography in particular, they're quite broad. So while some of the fundamental basis of them is the Fibonacci sequence and expands out to fractal. So when you see the branches of a tree, that pattern that they form where they branch out like that, that's a fractal, or that's based on the Fibonacci number sequence. When you see various compositions that have a divided line, and that line is usually on the third of the frame somewhere. Yeah, I haven't done it with this arrangement. It doesn't get me anymore. Like I don't concentrate on it much, but you've got a third here, you've got another third about here, and if you place something important on the third, and then you've got a third over here as well, you sort of end up drawing your eye through a spiral. So your eye gets drawn and then comes over here and gets busy over here, and then while you're busy over here, you kind of forget that there's some other things over here as well. And then when you start looking over here, then you get drawn back into the spiral. That's the golden mean. So while that is some of the core fundamentals of design composition, there are other things as well, like sequence. If you see a series of things, usually it's more appealing if those things are in an odd number of arrangements, like a 3 of something, or 5 of something, or 7 of something. Even people who do design with doing flower arrangements will tell you that an odd number of flowers in a bunch always look more appealing than an even amount for some reason. So you've got things like sequence or repetition, which is frequency and resonance is what we're talking about in that kind, but in a visual way, yeah. And then you've got things like color and the contrast between color or complementary colors. And then you've got things like tone, so the tonal balance between a really dark gray and a really light gray, and how that's balanced between the elements on the screen. And then you've got tonal balance and things like actual mood. So I'll get into this. When I was honing those skills, I didn't know what I was doing. I just thought, okay, I need to be really stingy and tight ass about taking photos on film, and I don't want to waste any frames, and I want everything to count as much as possible. I was in that process. I didn't really know what would come out of it, apart from taking a lot of photos that I was happy with. sorry, this mic's here. So what ended up happening was that I tried to separate. I tried to understand exactly what was going on and why this was occurring, because there's, like I was saying, people get drawn to a particular good composition, and there was a photo that I took that was kind of abstracted. You wouldn't look at it and immediately recognize anything in the photo. Like you could take a photo of a crying baby and it would elicit an emotional response in the viewer. Or you could take a photo of a nice looking woman or a nice looking man, and that would appeal in a particular way to the viewer as well, because they would relate to it. Or you could take a photo that had a warm sort of orangey color to it, and that would make you feel better, as opposed to a cooler photo that would make you feel, maybe a little bit more sad and constricted. But there's this one photo that I took, and it didn't have any of that in there. It was barely recognizable in terms of any relatability to anything. It was black and white, and there was a shoreline in the distance with some trees on it, and then you got water in front of it, and that's it. And it wasn't anything visually appealing as far as a postcard would go, or as far as some sort of travel book cover photo that you would see. But when people looked at it, they would feel this, and I asked people to look at it and tell me what they thought, and they would be immediately drawn to it, and they would feel this immense kind of sadness or sorrow, or just something more profound than they could actually describe. But they were drawn to it, and I was drawn to it as well. And when I looked into it a little bit further to try and find out what's actually going on here, you've got this shoreline in the distance with some trees. You could barely make out these trees, and then you've got this ripple in the water in front of it, and then you've got a reflection in that water. And what I realized was that the thing that's setting people off to be drawn into this photo and experience something beyond the photo was being caused by the fact that what they were drawn to wasn't actually in the photo directly, but it was rather in the reflection of the water, and the reflection of the water was the sky. And it wasn't a clear reflection, it was a wavy, diffused, kind of broken up reflection. And what this was kind of showing me was that rule of thirds structure arrangement was appealing to something in the consciousness, and I'm going to say it's the pineal gland, because there's an emotional aspect to this as well, even though there was nothing quite emotional in the photo as far as visuals go, nothing that you could actually relate to. So pineal gland responds to this and subconsciously sees something that isn't actually there and transcends you up into the clouds. So you have a semi-transcendent, let's just say semi-transcendent, because you're still grounded and you're still actually fixed to this thing that you're looking at. You're not having a dream experience, but you're actually looking at something and it's taking you somewhere else, and you're not aware of where it's taking you. So what the hypothesis that I came up with was that a particular alignment of objects that adhere to the rule of thirds in the Fibonacci sequence in a particular way that also includes some sort of element of being away, yeah, will take you to that place. And that same alignment and connection and transcendent experience, if you invert that and look at it in the opposite direction, then you could relate that to the alignment of celestial bodies that like ancient scripts and ancient stories talk about this a lot. And the pyramids of Giza lined up with the stars of the Orion. But I don't know a lot about that stuff. I know surface level stuff about that. But my connection to it, or my angle on it, is through photography and the alignment of things on this earth that connect with our consciousness in some way to elicit a certain response from us, which draws us into what we're looking at, while at the same time pulling us out to another location. And in the same way, I would hypothesize that when the stars and the celestial bodies, particular ones, arrange in a certain way, and because we are actually part of those stars, the molecules in our body actually came from celestial bodies, there is a connection between us and those stars, and that connection is through the pineal gland. And just as that connection there exists between the stuff over there in the sky, so does it exists within the world in front of us when we're taking photos and enjoying landscapes and enjoying the various arrangement of certain things. And exactly that thing that draws us into it is this this underlying pattern. There's Montana. This pattern, and the pattern from the perspective of design is the Fibonacci sequence and the golden mean ratio. On a more scientific level, I would relate it to Bohm's pilot wave theory, which is an explanation for, it's an alternative explanation for the unpredictable chaos described in quantum mechanics. So quantum mechanics says, hey, this weird stuff that goes on, we don't know why it goes on, and we attribute it to just random chaos, and therefore it's not predictable. But Bohm's pilot wave theory says that stuff that that quantum mechanics finds to be bound by everything, including our consciousness, it says that is actually a predictable wave pattern that permeates through everything. It permeates and exists in the space that we know as nothing. So nothing actually exists. Nothing does not exist, basically. It exists within the structures that we would formally or normally consider to be absolute or solid. So solid objects actually have space within it, and this pilot wave that Bohm talks about as BOHM, Bohm's pilot wave theory, that pilot wave exists and interacts with matter and stuff that is not matter and stuff that is, from our perspective, nothing, and it relates all of them together. It creates a connection between all these things, just as when things are aligned a certain way, like with what I'm describing, then there is a connection between the background, the foreground, my eyes when I'm taking that photo, the viewer's eyes when they're viewing that photo, their pineal gland, and the place it takes them to. And so there's also, in reverse, the celestial bodies have that same connection when they're in a particular arrangement or alignment with us as well. Let's move this over so we can see her a little. There she is. So that's my take on astronomy and astrology and how it fits into my worldview. I don't have any formal education on it or formal research knowledge or anything like that. But that's my perspective and where I've come in to understand and make sense of all that stuff. Personally, I think that a lot of the numerology, not all of it, but I think a lot of the numerology and a lot of the geometry that is attributed to astronomy, I think a lot of it is just stuff that gets us confused. And I think when you break it down and remove the math and remove the geometry from it, then it's just these simple, basic alignment concepts that create this connection between us and everything, or it amplifies the connection between things when they're aligned a particular way, and profound sort of things happen. You know, you can say looking at a photo and feeling a certain way isn't profound, but when it elicits an emotional reaction and there's no relatable thing there for you to actually elicit an emotional response from, then where is it coming from? Where is that emotion coming from? And if you think about consciousness and emotion as a kind of energy, then there's this energy being created out of nothing, or it was there in the first place in those objects that aligned a certain way, and you know. So that's my take on my hypothesis on photography, astronomy, and the pineal gland. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let me know how you're doing. Thanks, bye. Oh, I forgot to mention, there's like the way that we get caught up with the numbers and the geometry and kind of end up looking past the core fundamental of this connection that we have is a parallel to getting like having a digital camera or getting worked up and focusing too much on the settings of the camera and the particulars of the technicalities of the camera, and losing sight of what you're actually there in front of to take a photo of or to concentrate on. So there's a parallel to that, and there's also a timing thing there as well, where that feeling when you're looking at the outside world and things are kind of lining up. If the sun goes by half an hour, that moment's gone, that feeling is gone, it doesn't exist anymore, and you got to think about the next day. And it seems to be a golden hour. So golden hour is sunrise and sunset, about an hour each way. And what that seems to do, golden hour, because the sun is very low and it seems to be very directed, it ends up casting I don't know if I can do it here. No, it ends up casting half light and half shadow on things. Particularly if you look at trees and they're lit up from the side, they'll be kind of dissected. So even the timing of the sun or the light, that contributes something to this as well. So that creates another dissection within that pattern of composition. So that's just another thing I wanted to add, that there's this saying about capturing the right moment in time with photography, and there's also the concept of framing things in a particular way. Yeah, but that's I'm gonna derail with that, but that's just wanted to add that extra stuff.